Thank you. My computer, yes, yeah, that would be great. My computer's been in full-scale rebellion all day and yesterday as well. So you actually don't need to drag an object and put it there. And that's only in these first 4 slides. But what you're looking at is a group of apples collected by a scientist from Oxford named Barry Juniper, who was able to go to part of the wild forest that I never got to for a number of reasons, where he found this variety of apples growing cheek by jowl. And those are all the same species. Malus, sieversii. I won't inflict too many botanical names on you, but this gives you an idea of why I was so fascinated with the possibility of going to Kazakhstan. That did a lot of good, didn't it? All right, so let's play. Come on. There we go. That's better. All right. So, where is Kazakhstan? Well, it borders China, Russia, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and almost borders Tajikistan, but not quite. It's the 9th largest country in the world and the largest landlocked country in the world. Its border with Russia is one of the longest continuous borders in the world. The US-Canada border is actually longer. But there you can see the major cities, and got my handy little laser pointer here. And there's where I was stationed. And these are the Tien Shan Mountains, right here. These are also the Tien Shan Mountains. They kind of range into China and then back in. And connect with another mountain range that goes up and makes the border between Mongolia and China. So that's where I was. And the apples are found at sort of middle elevations all through here, or at least they were. And I think probably a good alternate, I mean, in the first place, the wild apples of Kazakhstan should be followed by a question mark, for reasons I'll explain in a couple of minutes. But it could also be, where have all the apples gone, sung to the tune of Where Have All the Flowers Gone by Peter, Paul, and Mary. Except it's really serious. Now, this is a Google map, Google Earth map, and there are a number of things on here that I would point out. These are all places where either I went or previous expeditions to Kazakhstan for apple collecting, particularly 4 expeditions in the 90s, 93 through 96, to collect seeds and genetic material and to see these apples growing in their native habitat. At that time, they were in pretty bad shape as far as their current extent compared to their previous extent. And it's just gotten worse since. So if you want to know where all the apples have gone, I'm going to show you in a second. But first of all, why me and why apples? Well, I love apples. I've been fascinated by them, by different varieties of apples for a very long time. And I was fortunate to live in 3 different apple growing regions, Vermont, Minnesota, and Massachusetts. But the real impetus for my interest was when I heard a commencement speech by the late John Sharkovsky, who is known to anybody involved in photography. He was the head of photography at the Museum of Modern Art for many years, and when he was asked how he would describe his occupation, he would say, "I am an amateur pomologist." He was as passionate about apples as I became. And in this commencement speech that I heard, he compared an art school to an apple seed, as opposed to a cultivated apple. Now, apples do not breed true from seed. If you plant an apple seed, you will get anything that falls within the general description of apple. And that means that whole variety that you saw in the first slide. If you want a true variety, you have to graft. And Sharkovsky commented that it was possible to see the job of an art school as grafting known stock onto a robust root, and making sure that you turned out competent, responsible, and predictable artists. But as far as he was concerned, an art school should really be like an apple seed. And that is, just plant the seed and see what comes up. And some of it will be palatable and some of it not. But they'll all be apples. So these are I guess these are 2013's apples. I only arrived in Kazakhstan on December the 2nd. So I wasn't going to see a lot of apples in December. But I saw more than I thought, because there were an awful lot still on the trees that just remained there from the previous year. And, I keep expecting this thing. So, here's how much I love apples. I ate one of those. Actually, I ate more than one of those. And a couple of them were cardboard-like, and I got rid of those pretty fast. But this particular one had fermented on the tree. So it was like a little shot of hard cider. And believe me, I gobbled that one up. So here's one of the first places in my travels with my friend Maksut that I stopped. It's an orchard, just a regular old orchard. And there were still apples on the trees there as well. And they were pretty small and pretty shrunken, but you know, I tried it anyway. And these apples, I don't need to tell you where they came from because they're all on the ground there. And they were delicious. They were absolutely, I ate several. Okay, so Almaty, that's where I was based. And this is what Almaty can look like on a typical winter day. Now, you may not know it, but there are actually mountains back there. And the next day, you could actually see them. So my dreams of wandering at large in the fruit forests were obviously going to have to be postponed for a while. My friend and driver didn't have a four-wheel drive car, so there were many places we couldn't go. And I ended up going to places where we could go. Now, this is a valley called Kuznetsov. It's the Turgen River. And as you see, there were apples still on the trees here. And are these wild? Well, anybody's guess. They could be wild, or they could be escapees from a nearby orchard, or they could be wild apples that have crossbred with domesticated apples and have a different genetic structure, much more abbreviated. Another place I went right at the beginning was a ski resort where, lo and behold, there were apples. I guess when they built the resort, they decided to keep a few of their apple trees. And again, I have no idea whether these are escapees from an orchard or whether that is a seedling from a wild apple that just took root there and that they decided to leave. But here you can see, you know, fun on the slopes, and that's an orchard back there. This may be an orchard. These are there's probably a good mixture of wild trees in here. There's probably a good mixture of escapees, or what some people call feral apples. And those are very likely volunteer apples as well. So apples are everywhere. But if you wonder where the apples went, this is one of the places. Probably 40 years ago, these slopes were covered with fruit forest. But after the Second World War, probably into the 70s, people were buying this land to build dachas, weekend homes, and that's what those are there. And you can see these have been terraced, so something was going on up there, and there may be a few apple trees among all of this stuff here. There are certainly people up here who have what they call in Kazakhstan apple gardens, which is what we would call an orchard. But that was the term of art, an apple garden. And here's another place the apples have gone. Here's a currently operating orchard. And by the way, much of the fruit forest was cleared to make room for orchards. So, which were much more, obviously, commercially viable. But this whole area where I was, right kind of at the foot of the mountains. And some of the mountains up here are up to 14,000 feet. So they're not piddling mountains. But believe me, if you think that certain parts of the United States are suburbanizing fast, Almaty should be considered among them. And here's another place. This is a nursery in the Turgen Valley where there are still remaining stands of possibly wild apples, but this guy is growing apple seedlings, apple trees for sale, commercial sale. And there were a couple of Red Delicious, but these were mostly Jana Gold. So here we are in the birthplace of apples, and they're importing varieties developed in the United States to grow. So I was anxious, right? This is quite near where that nursery was, and this is, I think, what you'd say is kind of a typical scene in a wild apple forest in the winter. Pretty tangled. And looking out on the mountains there. And here we are back in development land, and you can see that this is all quite fresh. And there's a lovely Z-shaped road going up, and there are apples on these trees as well. And these are probably seedlings that escaped from the orchard, which was just next door. And here's the scene we saw just a couple of minutes ago in the spring, when things are just beginning to bud out. This is an old orchard that it's very hard to tell if it's being restored. I don't think so. It's in pretty bad shape. And you can see that right across the street is Almaty's tallest building, which surmounts something called the S&T Mall, where every luxury good that you can find on Fifth Avenue in New York City is for sale. There's a lot of money in Kazakhstan, but there aren't very many people who have it. It's just like the United States. Let's see, I think it was in 2007, Almaty hosted the Asian Winter Games. So this is the ski jump. And, I always wondered how you start. Like, what's your first jump? Right? I mean, yeah, just get on your skis, head down, you'll figure it out. Well, there were 5 jumps here. Like baby jump, adolescent jump, well, no, maybe juvenile jump, then the adolescent jump, and then mama and papa jumps. Unfortunately, it's still an area of residual sexism. But the baby jump, actually the lip of the incline was about maybe that high off the slope. So, you could crash and probably not do too much damage to yourself, especially with those great big sticks on you. In the spring, when things were blooming, I went to again, back to the Turgen Valley, and the apples were in full bloom. And so these are all petals from the apple trees. And I was, as they say, gobsmacked with the beauty, and I'm afraid that I fatally lost my irony here. Pretty hard to be ironic in the face of and the smell of apple blossoms everywhere you can see and all around you. pretty magical place, really. And this is about maybe 200 yards from a highway. That tree is probably about 70 or 80 feet tall. It's a good bit taller than most of the apples you've ever seen. This is the Turgen Valley, and this is an area called Kuznetsov. And everywhere you see a little, tuft of white, that's a blooming apple tree. But there are lots that aren't in bloom or about to come in bloom or have already bloomed. So there are a lot of apples out there, and maybe some of them are wild, and this is a protected area, but what that means is that cattle and horses graze freely there, and cattle particularly are capable of doing a great deal of damage to young trees. They'll just eat them right up. And so the consequence is that there are a lot of older trees, middle-aged to older trees in this mix, but not many young ones. And that does not bode well. So again, let's face it, I'm weak. I should have my papers taken away as a modern artist. Succumbing to beauty. That's the same tree from up above. This is the blossom of a variety of apple, actually a species of apple called Malus niezvetskiana, what used to be thought to be a variety of apples, of sieversii, but now it's given its own designation as a species. And if the regular apples are deliriously beautiful, then the niezvetskis are just over the top. This is actually in the apple garden of let's see, can I go back? Yes. Of the ranger who looks over this place. So this is the same place as in those blooming views in June, sorry, this is June. Things are really leafed out. And out here, I mean, it's very hard to get accurate information, but a lot of this open area here was cleared either for crops or for grazing. I made a collection of really excellent trees, and this was one of them. And then here's Kuznetsov in the fall. And there's a herd of horses. They roam very freely. And, not only did I succumb to beauty, but, cute. I succumbed to cute as well. I asked one of my friends, informants, what the fate of these horses was. He said, oh, well, they'll be eaten. Horse is the favorite meat in Kazakhstan. And, they raise herds of horses for slaughter, just the way we raise cattle, sheep, and goats. Okay, so now I apologize because my computer, as I said, was acting up on me. And so the rest of this talk, which is of necessity kind of disjointed because Keynote stopped working and I couldn't put any more slides in it. So I got what I thought were the essential ones. And preview should be opening here. Oh. There we go. Okay. Now, let's see. Yes, as I said, there we go. Okay. Well, you know what I think I'll do is I'll go through these and, Photoshop. Yeah, that's interesting. You see what I mean? You see my problem here. So, one of the things that I was interested in is the culture of apples in Kazakhstan, and they certainly are a big part of the culture, which you can see in these pictures. Alma, in Cyrillic, that means apple. I'll come back to this. I don't know what that says. Does anybody speak Russian or read Russian? Especially Russian script. Can you see that? No. It's pretty indistinct. There's my wife, Elise, photographing a beautiful apple kiosk, I guess, display. There's a shopping bag at a construction site. Wait a minute. There we go. Yeah, that's a little easier to see, isn't it? Now, can you see it? Yeah. Well, they're very excited about it. Want me to leave it? No? Okay. All right, there's Elise again. This is kind of the main pedestrian mall on a day when every month there was a wonderful Central Asian bazaar. And these were the kiosk signs. Okay. Let's see where we are here. All right. Now, there were also apples growing in Almaty. Huh. Interesting. And these were growing along the river, which is hardly a river, it's a concrete canal, but it is, it does flow continually. And somebody planted a row of 4 apple trees, and I thought, oh, well, maybe these will do well. No, they didn't do well. They had nice blossoms, but very little else. All right. Now, the irony of apple culture in Almaty is that here they are. You want to see some of these? Again, I apologize for the ragged nature of this presentation. See, this is opening, and I really didn't ask it to. Any of this stuff. Okay, well, let's go here. Here we're, oh, no, don't want to do that. All right, okay. There we go. Did they all open or not? Yes. Oh, look. Okay. All right. That one was growing by itself. Let's see. Which way shall we go? That's for later. Sorry. All right. This is in a town called, outside of a town called Tekeli, which is the entrance to the area that I couldn't go, the Jungarsky Alatau. The trail was right across the river, but there was a very serious looking army base right nearby. So I thought best not to do my usual thing of trespassing. Okay. Well, this is nice. Might make you hungry. Those actually are barberries. They're wild barberries. And they were delicious, as you can see. I sampled them liberally. In the apple forest, there are not only apples, but pears. There are nut trees, particularly walnuts in the southern part of the range. There are barberries, several species. There are also hawthorns, which we think of as an ornamental plant, but they actually have quite wonderful berries or fruits. It's actually a pome fruit. And I think, Elise and I got as a gift a jar of the most delicious preserve that was probably barberry. And interestingly enough, they didn't seed them first. So eating them was, a challenge. And because the seeds are very small. Let's see. And this is the last place I went, called the Aksu River Valley, and the area is called Aksu Zabagli. This is, snow and glacial meltwater. It's quite astonishingly blue. And this is looking down into the valley from the trail down in, and there's the river at the bottom, and right there, and there, and there, and probably ranging up the slopes is one of the other major stands of wild apple, Malus sieversii, and these are likely to be wild because the nearest orchard is a couple of kilometers away, and that's considered to be the limit. And that gives you an idea of what it looks like in an apple forest. When it's not full of snow. Okay, here are the pictures from Tekeli. All right, we may be at the end of our rope. But let's see if anything else nice crops up here that we just can't live without seeing. No, I think that'll do it. Now, after this rather ragged group of slides, and I'm going to go to sleep here, so we don't have to look at this. So, the story of the apple. Well, apples originated in Kazakhstan. Most of our domesticated apples are derived originally from that stock. They started traveling along what became the Silk Road very early, possibly as early as Neolithic times. Thoreau, in a wonderful essay he wrote called Wild Apples, and he admitted that the apples that he was calling wild apples weren't wild because, thank you, they were all escaped from orchards and so had a huge range of variation, which he delighted in. The Romans were really the ones who introduced the apple to Europe in general. Thoreau thinks that they got it from the Greeks, but that's probably not the case. There's been a lot of genetic work in the last few years, and I'd be glad to answer questions about that. A lot more is known about the apple genome. One kind of startling fact is that whereas the human genome is 30,000 genes long, the apple genome is 59,000 genes long. So the potential variation within that genome is virtually infinite. And that means that if the wild apple is lost, then it's as if we are throwing away one of the most precious resources that we're aware of. The wild apples of Kazakhstan were recognized in the beginning of the 20th century as something very, very important and important to preserve. And the 20th century saw a continual erosion of that original stock. One of our colleagues, Gary Naban, was in Kazakhstan in 2006 and wrote an article that he published in Orion. And at that time, the man who had been heading the research into apples, Imak Zhangaliev, estimated that between 70 and 80% of the original apple stock was gone. Lost either to outright destruction or crossbreeding with domesticated stocks. And the most recent figure that I saw is that there's only about 10% left. The Niezvetsky is endangered in the wild, which means it's highly likely to be extinct in a fairly brief period of time. Yeah?
But if these things are being crossbred with domestics, they're not being lost, they're just hiding?
Well, the thing is, you can't, once the crossbreeding has happened, you can't recover what that, then it becomes something else. And you can't.
Back cross for wild characteristics.
Well, probably you can. I'm not a botanist, so, but there is a general, my understanding from all the people I've talked to is that the wild stock, with its huge variability, is inevitably diminished by interbreeding. Now, I found out something very interesting. One of the people I talked to, he said the flowers, the blossoms, and the fruit are genetically not as large or robust as the true wild apple, but the trees retain their genetic endowment. So the man that I spoke to, Anatoly Mischenko, was one of the heads of a UN development project in Kazakhstan during the 2000s, ran for about 10 years. And one of the things he was trying to do is to reproduce apples from cuttings, which apparently is not that easy to do. I stand corrected if you have other information, but this was what I heard from him, and he was very deeply involved in the UNDP development project, and has done a lot of genetic work on the apple genome and on propagation. The interest now is in trying to reestablish the apple forest, the original wild forests, which, of course, if you know anything about conservation biology and about the attempts to restore ecosystems that have been lost, there hasn't been a lot of success in doing that. And the fruit forests are forests. They're not orchards. They're not things that are a creation of human ingenuity. They are intact and whole entire ecosystems, each element of which depends on every other element. So you can't reestablish a forest just by planting a few trees of the right varieties. There's a synergy that happens between all the species in the forest that is very difficult to reproduce. Not that it can't be, but apparently, again, the people I talked to in Kazakhstan and people here at the university, we're not optimistic about that being accomplished in the near future, if ever. So it's a bit of a downer, really, to think about the wild apples. But the most important thing now is for the Kazakh government and the Kazakh people to really understand what they have and begin to act to protect it. Kazakhstan, Almaty, used to be ringed by orchards, most of which are gone. You saw a few. And the whole front range of the Tien Shan was heavily cultivated in apples, other fruits as well, but mostly apples. And since then, those have fallen into disuse and have become, what's the forestry term? Not senile.
Senescent?
Huh?
Senescent?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, some of those seem to be being restored, but the irony is, of course, that when you go to the market and when you go to the big bazaar in the center of Almaty, almost all the apples are from China. China is the largest producer of and exporter of apples in the world. Pretty much doubles what we do, and we're number 2. So while you saw that all around Almaty there are these celebrations of the apple, I mean, Almaty means father of apple. In fact, when you talk to Kazakhs, many of them are not aware that the wild forests exist, or if they are, they're not aware that they're unique to Kazakhstan, and if they're aware of that, they're not aware of how precarious their situation is. When you talk to a Kazakh about apples, they say, oh yes, the apport apple. It's like this holy grail of apples. The history is a little murky, but apparently the apport apple was developed in Eastern Europe, maybe in Poland, and maybe in Russia. But it didn't do well there. And so somebody brought a cutting back to Kazakhstan, and it took off like gangbusters. And so what everybody says, yes, the apport. I remember the apport when I was a child. They were this big, and you could smell them a room away. And, it's maybe. I mean, they were apparently pretty great apples. But now those have been cloned and recloned and recloned and recloned, and they're not the apple they once were. So I'm not sure what I can do, but I made a lot of connections in Kazakhstan, and there are things afoot that may actually bring the importance of the wild apple and its uniqueness to the attention of the Kazakhs, because they're the ones who can save it. And if anybody has any good ideas about how I could proceed, I would welcome them. So thank you very much. And